Good afternoon. Welcome to the City Council Audit Committee meeting. The meeting will start in 60 seconds.
Welcome, everybody. I'll call to order the Audit Committee meeting for today, Thursday, April 28, 2016. I would entertain a motion to approve the minutes of December 16, 2015.
So moved.
Second.
Second, and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. We'll move right into our reports and updates. Let's start with landfill cash controls.
Yeah, this was our newest member of our team, Ashley. This was her first assignment, and so I'm going to let her present the report. Go ahead.
Good afternoon, everyone. So I completed the landfill cash control audit in January of this year. This audit was not included in the 2015 annual audit plan. It was a special project request by the audit committee and was approved at the April 2015 audit committee meeting. It was requested since their cash controls hadn't been tested since 2008, and they handle a large amount of cash transactions each day. Also, there had been multiple occurrences of misappropriation in the past. The city operates and manages the sanitary landfill. The landfill has a service area covering 5 counties, and approximately 260,000 citizens utilize the services provided by the landfill. In 2014, the landfill generated approximately $11 million in revenue. Most of this revenue is generated from tipping fees charged to the customers for using the landfill. The fees are set and approved by city ordinance. Customers have 2 options to fulfill payment of the fees. First, they can choose to pay the scale house operator at the time of the service with cash, check, or credit card. The second option is to charge the tipping fees to the customer's account, which will be invoiced then to the customer the following month. On the next page, you can see the amount collected by each of the different payment methods for the last 3 years. You can also see that 8% of collections are by cash receipts and 92% of collections are invoiced charges, so those that get billed to the customers. There were 5 objectives to this audit. 1, to determine if cash handling procedures are properly segregated. 2, to determine if physical security procedures are in place and being followed. 3, to determine if cash receipts are deposited timely and accurately. 4, to determine if written cash handling policies and procedures are current, properly documented, and being followed. And 5, to determine if landfill usage rates are consistent with city ordinance and if the charges are accurately assessed and recorded. The testing of controls covered from January 1, 2015 through September 30th, 2015. The results of this audit, I spent a morning at the scale house one day and then an afternoon out there another day to observe their procedures. I determined a receipt was issued for all transactions. Checks were restrictively endorsed upon receipt, and voided transactions were reviewed and initialed by management. I also verified there was proper segregation of duties. However, I did note during my observation that there was a lack of segregation of duties over checks received in the mail at the landfill scale house, and I'll discuss that more on the next page. I also observed there were adequate physical safeguards in place. The perimeters of the landfill are surrounded by a fence. The scale house doors are locked at all times. Cash was kept in a locked safe, and transactions are monitored via video surveillance. I was informed by management that video surveillance recordings are only stored for 2 weeks and then recorded over, and I'll also discuss that on the next page. I reviewed the cash handling procedures and determined they were current, properly documented, and being followed. I also reviewed a sample of 42 receipts and the applicable deposit slip for that day. I verified the customers were charged appropriate rates as set by ordinance, that receipts reconciled to the daily deposit, deposits were made timely and intact. I also reconciled the daily deposits to the bank statement and general ledger. On the next page, we made 2 recommendations to address the results. Number 1, management should ensure proper segregation of duties exists for checks received in the mail at the landfill scale house. What happened is when I performed my observation, there were 2 payments that were mailed to the scale house instead of to the lockbox location. So there's nothing preventing the same individual from opening the mail, entering the payment, and creating the deposit. Management agreed with our finding, and they will input controls to ensure there's proper segregation of duties if and when an incident like this occurs in the future. The date of expected implementation for these controls is January 2016, so this should be in place already. Our second recommendation was that the city should research and implement a way to store video surveillance for longer than 2 weeks. Management agreed with the finding and will work with the city IT department to evaluate additional storage of up to 45 days. The date of expected implementation is April 2016. We concluded that internal controls over cash receipts, and bank deposits are appropriate and functioning properly. The implementation of the above recommendations will strengthen controls further. I'd like to again thank Dustin and his staff and the finance team for their assistance during the audit. So if anyone has any questions or comments.
Thank you, Ashley. Any questions? Councilor Karski.
Thank you. I know this is a cash audit, and a couple questions, maybe more business operations, but I'm just wondering about the wisdom on the recommendation of making a copy of a check. It seems problematic on a couple of different levels. I don't know if I want anybody making copies of my checks for a security reason for myself. Just having a journal, if a check comes in, it's logged in a journal and put in a deposit bag or box or whatever, and somebody else initials that it was received and that it's there would make a lot of sense. But can anybody explain to me why we would need to make a copy of a check?
Question.
Ashley, any comments? Or Rich? Kim?
I think that's proof of the record of the check. The copy of the check is stored in a filing cabinet that's locked, and it's in the scale house, and that's locked as well.
For how long? I mean, how do we dispose of them? What are we doing with these?
I would assume that would follow the same procedures as all other documents that are
Dustin, could you help us on this?
closed.
And one other question, is it possible that it could be scanned and it's just stored electronically in a file?
Dustin Hanson, landfill superintendent. Yes, the checks are stored in the landfill scale. We have a safe inside of the scale, and then they're deposited the next day.
How long are the checks, the copies kept?
Basically indefinitely.
You also, as I understand it, issue a receipt, which you should have a copy of?
That's correct.
So we in fact have 2 copies, a copy of the check, and we have a copy of the receipt that should have the check number
Correct.
on it. Just wondering, Ashley, can you help us?
In this instance, the receipt wasn't issued at that time because this is somebody who actually just mailed in a payment. So it's an actual accounts receivable check that just happened to come to the scale house. This is what I observed that day. So 2 checks came in the mail that day that were receivables, and the customers mailed their payment there when they actually should have mailed their payment to the lockbox address.
That's correct. We still get quite a few checks from our commercial accounts that drop them off at the scale. A lot of times you have owners that drive their own trucks and they just want to drop off the check. They don't want to use the lockbox.
So we don't issue a receipt if it comes in the mail? I mean, as a practice, a business practice, wouldn't that make sense to issue a receipt even if nobody is there to give it to, just as a manner of record keeping? I guess, and maybe I'm off base, and if anybody else wants to chime in on this, but making copies of checks just does not seem to be a good business practice.
Anyone? Rich, any comment on that?
Ultimately, it's up to management how they want to implement the recommendation. I think the recommendation was just to get proper segregation of duties.
That's correct.
And the details, a lot of times, it's up to management, but that was our recommendation, but management can always do it slightly different, or...
Okay.
Rex?
Yes.
Do you guys keep just a check log of incoming checks?
Yes, so when the checks come in, before it's open, two scale operators will view that opening of the check and they will initial off on a form.
Okay, and what does the form include? I mean, in customer account number, name, dollar
Basically
amount
name,
received?
company name, check number, and then initial by the scale operators.
I guess what I'm getting to is I don't necessarily see I don't see it as a huge problem, but I don't see the need for the copy of the check unless you're using it for something else if you have it all logged.
Okay.
So, I mean, it is something I think you could possibly do without.
Okay.
And I would think if you're, about as long as you need to keep them is until you're assured that they're on the statement. So
Until the-
indefinitely,
yeah,
I
until
would
it's-
suggest that you
Yeah.
probably get rid of those.
Clear.
Probably once the statement comes in, you could probably
Okay.
Yeah,
dispose of
probably
them properly.
and
Get rid
in
of
a
them
safe manner,
in a safe manner, yes.
Okay, I agree with that.
shred them or burn them or do something, yeah.
Okay.
If I could, one more thing. I just noticed the credit card payments have gone up a lot. And I don't know if the city has a vendor for credit card processing, and I know credit card fees can vary greatly from one to another.
I don't think they had, I think it was in 2012 when that first started. They didn't have the connection, right,
We
electronically.
did not accept credit
They
cards.
did not accept credit cards until late 2012, is that?
Yes, that's
December
correct.
of 2012.
Yes, late in 2012.
Yeah. You either had to have cash or a check, and, yeah,
And just
then
a
it
side
goes
note
to-
on that, there was a lot of customers that would come in that did not have a check or cash, because obviously most of your places will take credit cards, and we'd have to turn them away.
Is it up to each department then to find their own vendor for credit card processing, or is that a city-wide program that we use for that type of thing?
well, we're going to ask that question. We have a citywide cash audit going on right now, and one thing we want to look at is just the security over credit cards when they're presented for payment. I don't know if we have some, I can't answer that question right now, but
there are
it's,
processing fees, and they, like I said, from one to another, they can.
They can vary.
It can
vary.
be as
Very
much as 2 to
significant
3%
expense, too,
per
if we-
transaction.
Yeah.
I mean, that would add up over time.
Yes, on a,
If I
$11
may,
million.
if I recall right from the utility billing audit a couple years ago, we do get a reduced fee being a government entity, or it was a
Yeah.
lot lower than I expected
Than
it to be.
the
too.
merchant-
It wasn't the
yeah.
traditional 2 or 3%.
yeah.
might be something to put on, to add to your cash audit deal.
Well, I think I had Ashley ask the finance department, as we start the citywide cash, how much are we spending for credit cards? I think we got that information already, didn't we, Ashley?
Yes.
From the finance office, because we knew that question would come up. Well, how much are we spending for credit card fees? So we have that information, and then we also wanted to look at the if we're complying with those security standards over that information that's on the cards, make sure that we're.
I think that, yeah.
So that'll be in
I'm glad
that
to hear
report.
We're looking at it, and I think.
Yeah, we're
if
looking-
we
and that'll
go
be in
do
that
an
citywide
RFP on
cash
it, we
audit. That'll-
Probably should.
Yeah.
And if I could, the last question, invoice charges are up like 40% in the last, that 3-year period. How long do we carry balances on invoice charges? Hard to be paid within 10 days, 20 days? Do we carry them over from month to month? What's the procedure?
60 days is a limit on an account. Once they pass the 60-day, then we basically inactivate that account.
Okay.
I want to reiterate what we were talking about just before that, though, that when that cash audit is done, we make sure that we don't have, that landfill doesn't have one account, that city water has another account, that we have one account that it goes into.
Yeah. We want to make sure we don't have any accounts that we don't know about. And we should just have basically one with,
Account for
I
the
believe it's
city.
with First Premier, one account. unless I think there might be a couple of cases where we have good reason to have another bank account, but yeah.
Dustin, I have one other question, if no one else. Go ahead, Mr. Kiley.
I'd just like to know, typically, how many checks are we dealing with on a monthly basis or a weekly basis?
From account holders, it's very minimal. Probably 10 or less.
Okay. Thank you.
On the recommendation number 2, Dustin, it said the one under that is work with the city IT department to evaluate increase video storage up to 45 days. April 16 was the date. Have we completed that?
Yes, we're currently we're up to 30 days with our new system. We switched over to what's called a milestone software for our cameras. We're 30 days into it. We've set up certain cameras on 30-day recording and other cameras on 45-day. And currently with that 30-day, we're at about 350 gigabyte, and we have over 500 gigabyte of storage. So we're confident that we'll get to that 45-day. We may even exceed that 45-day.
Super, super. Other questions?
Do we need a motion to accept
Need
it?
a motion to accept the audit
So moved.
report?
You know, one other point here, just if I may. With the credit card payments, I'd like to assume that we're not capturing the card information, but I felt like I better ask that because we certainly don't want to have customer credit card information stored on file somewhere.
No, I don't believe we are.
Dean Borkart with Public Works. No, it's a swipe. We don't hold the card. We don't reuse a card. It has to be processed on each payment.
Great, thank you.
I need a second to accept this.
Second.
Okay, second from Kylie. Any further discussion? Seeing none, all in favor, aye?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries unanimously. Thank you and good job, Ashley.
Thanks.
Next on the agenda is the review of the construction contract costs, and I believe you have that one, Rich.
Yes, I do. And it's a longer report than usual, and I put a lot more detail than I usually put in a report, and that was because I'm going to present this to basically our new council in May when they're seated. I kind of want to put in the report, okay, what are a lot of those audit steps we go through, and we would not put that in the report, but I kind of want them to see that there's a lot of steps that when we're trying to answer a audit objective, there's a lot of steps that we go through, so you see a lot of those bullet points, a lot of detail. And the reason this was started in 2014, and the reason we finished it up in 2016 is because a lot of these construction contracts are typically the bulk of the work is finished pretty quickly within, typically 2 to 3 months. A lot of times the final payment, though, will take a long time before there's the final payment because they may have to finish the project in the fall, and then the following spring they'll do the planting and that sort of thing, and there'll be just a few little miscellaneous things that have to be wrapped up before the final payment is processed. So on several of these projects, they were started in 2014, and they didn't have the final payment, I think, until November of last year, so just really not that long ago. And then we want to make sure on that final payment that there's what's called a Department of Labor certification as to unemployment contributions. That has to be on that final payment. That's under state law. So we had to actually see that final payment go through to do our audit work. And then, anyway, we'll just get into the objectives there on page 3. Review the current policies and observe procedures in place and compare to leading practices to see if we were doing leading practices and to see how often those are being reviewed. Number 2, determine if the controls and processes are in place to effectively administer the incentive program, and I'll speak about that in a moment. Number 3, determine if the contracts are properly bid and awarded in compliance with state law and city policy. Number 4, determine if the services and materials are being properly billed and reviewed. Number 5, if they're effectively monitored, documented, and if the quality work is tested. And then finally, we looked at the change orders. Are they properly reviewed? Are they approved, executed, and comply with the state law? And also, are they in line with the industry standards for percentage of change? The The scope of the audit was the formal construction contracts, those that are $50,000 or more, and there were 68 of those in 2014. And we spent a lot of time interviewing staff, going to the construction sites. I did ride-alongs with our city engineer, Chad Heavey, reviewing the documents, general conditions, the project manager's manual, looking at state law, looking at the city policies, looking at a lot of agendas from city council meetings, that sort of thing. So there's a lot of work into that. So as far as the current policies and procedures, how do they compare to leading practices? For the most part, they do compare to leading practices, and they are formally reviewed. And the two situations that we noted where they're not is a lot of cities will have a conflict of interest statement signed when we hire the consulting engineering firm to say that they don't have any conflict of interest with the construction company that they're monitoring. We had a discussion with Chad and his team about that. The City of Sioux Falls doesn't do that. They're generally aware of the ownership situations in Sioux Falls. It's not that big a city. And they also pointed out that consulting engineers that we hire are PEs, they're professional engineers. They have a license, and they're required by their code of ethics of professional engineers to disclose if there was a conflict of interest. And I verified that. I did find the code of ethics, and it's in there. So we didn't make a recommendation. We just noted it in the report, and so that's something that we don't do. It's a leading practice, but there's a reason for that. The other leading practice that we don't do is we don't do a formal evaluation of the contractor performance against a pre-established list of criteria. A lot of cities will do that, especially larger cities will have something in the file that when the contract is wrapped up, the project manager or whomever, the contract manager will fill out the form saying, the contractor did this, they did this, maybe give them a grade or whatever. And they kind of use that to evaluate their potential contract, in the future, if that person would contract for a job. When we had that discussion with Chad and his team also, they don't do that, but if there's a substandard performance, that's carefully documented in the records. And there was one case in 2014 when there was an apparent low bidder on, I think, the Elman Station Point contract on the bike trail. And Mark Cotter had asked us to particularly look at that one to make sure that we followed the procedures, and we did. We did follow the procedures that were in the executive order, and that was based on substandard performance on previous contracts that was in the file. I spent about an hour with one of the city attorneys going through all the documentation of why the apparent low bidder did not get the contract. So just want to make you aware of that. So move on to the next one, the incentive program. The incentive program is something fairly new. It's been around just a few years now. And each year, a handful of contracts are selected, those that have a high impact on businesses, very time-sensitive. An example would be Phillips Avenue about 5 years ago, when we wanted to get that work done as quickly as possible because it really affected the businesses there. So we'll offer a financial incentive to the contractor to finish early and give them a bonus. I mean, we do punish contractors if they don't meet the deadline. We do what's called liquidated damages, But this is a case of we want you to finish as quick as possible. We know that's going to require overtime. People are going to have to work Saturdays. So our Public Works team has, when trying to come up with a good number, they'll consult with contractors. How much would it take for you to be financially incentivized to finish early? And it's kind of a judgment call. And as far as which projects are selected, that's a judgment call too. And I think we looked at 4 contracts in 2014 that were incentivized. On page 5 there, we looked at 4 projects. Contractor finished early on 3 of the 4, and then 2 of the 4 got the maximum possible incentive, and then the other one got a partial incentive. The one project that did not get the incentive I think it was on West 12th Street by the fairgrounds there. It had to do with joint repairs in the street, and so we asked the team why the contractor perhaps didn't get the incentive. And it was a case of they would hire employees to do the work, and it was very difficult work. It's hot. There are a lot of traffic going back and forth, and it was hard to keep some of the employees on the job. They'd quit. So they were having trouble with keeping men on the job and getting them trained, and so they finished the project. They just didn't get their bonus. So, but another thing that Mark Cotter had asked us to look at is the communication with the property owners on those projects. And so we picked the 41st Street from Sertoma to T. Ellis Road. And then we picked the downtown 2nd Avenue project by the post office. And we contacted the property owners. And we asked them, how did the communication go? And do you think the city should continue to use the incentive program? And they all agreed, yeah, we think the city should continue to do that. We like that. One of the property owners said, I kind of got hit hard. It was Kevin Nyberg from Ace Hardware. I mean, just in 2014, both his business on Sycamore and one on 41st was affected, but that's just the way it goes. It just worked out that way. So they do lose some business, obviously, but it has to be done. As far as the communication was fine. Before they start the project, everybody said the city was communicating well. It's just there was 2 property owners. There was one on the 41st Street and one on the 2nd Avenue downtown that had an issue come up during the construction. They were a little frustrated with the communication, but once it was brought to the attention of our city engineer and our public works director, then those were resolved. So we concluded the incentive program was achieving the objective, which was to finish timely on those high-impact projects. And 2 of the things that make that more likely to happen was the management is insisting that the contractors use the plan of the day meetings. And also they require very detailed, up-to-date construction schedules when they're awarded the contract. So that kind of keeps everybody on track, and it alerts the project manager that if the contractor is in jeopardy of not meeting the schedule. And the plan of the day it's just a good management tool, and a lot of the contractors use that, but it was just like getting all the parties involved, the subcontractors, utility companies, property owners if necessary, just have that plan of the day meeting in the morning and just get everybody everybody knows what everybody's doing. So those 2 things really are a good thing. Next objective, contracts properly bid and awarded in compliance with law and policy. And so we went through those 6 audit procedures. The one thing we did note, we noted contract 14-1017, that went to Seal Pros. That did not appear on the consent agenda, and that was a violation of ordinance. Further investigation, it appeared just to be a mistake, not a deliberate action. That the person that usually did that work was gone on vacation that week. I think that's probably what happened. Management did take some steps to add a procedure to make that less likely to happen. After I drafted the report, it occurred to me that council might have a question on that. I said, well, somebody violated the ordinance. So I did speak with Dave Fifley, the attorney. I told him what happened. He said, well, yeah, it's probably going to happen. He said, was it properly bid? I said, yeah, it was properly bid. He said, well, I'd be more concerned that it was, improperly bid. Obviously, if it should be on the agenda, it should be on the agenda, but we're not going to go back after the fact and, put it on the agenda. By the time I became aware of it, it probably 6 months. The contract was awarded, it was finished, the contractor was paid, and then when I was doing my audit work, I found out it never was on the consent agenda. It's something that we'll do as auditors. I think something that we can look at during the year, not as part of a regular audit, but just something we can do at our desk. We can, pick selections of contracts and make sure they get on the agenda. Can I guarantee it'll never happen again? No. But I don't think that was deliberate. So I just wanted to make everybody aware of that. So
The work got done.
the work got done. It was properly bid. It did not appear on the consent agenda. And so just wanted to point that out. Services and materials properly billed and reviewed. We're looking at those pay requests. Are they mathematically correct? Does everything tie out? And they all did. We did. And then we selected those on page 7 there in the middle there. Those we looked at especially that the new fire station 11. We looked at that 41st Street project, and we looked at the downtown on 2nd Avenue project. We're looking to see that those projects were effectively monitored, they were documented, quality work tested. We spent time going out to the construction sites, talking to the project managers, looking at the project files, looking at all the test results. You know, when they test the concrete, we ask the managers, you know, how, when it comes out of the concrete truck, you know, how do you make sure it's good stuff? And they answered all of our dumb questions. Typically what happens is there's always somebody from Chad's staff assigned. There's always an engineer assigned to every project. But typically, if it's a large enough project, we'll also hire a consulting engineer to basically also be a project manager. And both the city engineer who's assigned and the project manager, the consulting engineer, are reviewing, you know, the daily work. They're there physically, watching what's going on. They're looking at everything that's going on, reviewing the pay request to make sure they're correct. So we didn't have any issues with that. And I do have some pictures there on page 8 and 9 of the various projects and the top of page 10. And then we looked at the city has minimum testing requirements, especially for the road projects. You know, like you know, the concrete has to be of a certain strength. They have to be every 150 feet. They have to be tested. The project managers and the consulting engineers are very well aware of those minimum testing requirements. We looked at all the test results. We went in the project files and accessed all of that. And we were confident that everything is going according to the manual, and that the people that are assigned are very qualified people. They're all professional engineers. They're all PEs. And there was a few failures on a couple of materials. There were very few, and we had quite a discussion with Chad and his team. We went kind of through the ones that failed, and you know, maybe a compaction test was close. It wasn't exactly, maybe the score was supposed to be 90 and it was an 89. We looked at those and we discussed it. I think a couple of the asphalt tests we talked about on 41st Street and the way they resolve those. And a lot of times they'll do a deduct on the pay application. They weren't exactly perfect. The problem is if you ask the contractor to go in there and say, fix that crack, it almost causes more problems. And Chad can discuss that in way more detail than I can. It's almost worse to try and correct it so that there would typically be a deduct on the pay. I mean, it's safe to drive on. It's not like it's a poor quality road, but as far as, you know, fixing it, the standard practice, I think you follow the DOT, what the South Dakota DOT, the standard practice is on that. And so if you have questions, Chad and his team can answer that. But we'll get into the change orders. That was the last thing. The reason we put change orders in there, that can be a real risk area. You know, change orders can get completely out of hand. And so we looked at those. Well, first of all, is there some accepted standard for change order? You know, when you compare that to the base bid, is there some range that you would typically want to see? We looked at how the consulting engineers are compensated. You know, is there some financial incentive for them to approve change orders because they would get paid more than, because, you know, if they're being paid as a percentage of the contract, and would they be more likely to approve a change order just because they get paid more if it's a consulting engineer? We looked at that question, and we looked at the state law. You know, what has to be change ordered, what would have to be rebid. We look to see that the change orders are appearing on the city council agenda when they're supposed to be. The total change order dollar amounts for all the 2014 formal construction contracts, all 68 contracts, that was about 6.7% compared to the original base bid, and that's right in line with the 5 to 10% range that we found reported in the research literature. Consulting engineers they do not have a financial incentive to be more inclined to recommend change orders. And we looked at those. I think there was 3 or 4 change orders that were more than 25% of the base bid in 2014. We looked at those to say, what's going on here? Why is such a big increase? They were all justifiable. They had a reasonable justification. It did not appear to be used to compensate for a low bid. You know, sometimes change orders, if they're not watched, can be used to compensate for a low bid. You know, if the contractor, I'm just going to low bid this and get the contract, and then I'll just change order my way to profit. I didn't see any evidence of that going on. We write these contracts are written pretty tightly, so I didn't have any concern about that. And the sample that we looked at, it did not appear that there was work already included in the base bid that was in the change order. So it looked like they're being reviewed properly. Change orders were properly approved by the mayor or the city engineer, depending on the dollar threshold, according to the policy. One issue note at bottom page 11 there was change orders appearing on the meeting agenda. According to our interpretation of that ordinance, only the change orders exceeding the state bid limit need to appear on that on the consent agenda. And when we talked to city attorney, he agreed with that interpretation. All change orders had been appearing on the consent agenda, probably more than needed to be there. And when we did our testing of 20 change orders, 15 appeared on the meeting agenda, 5 did not. But of those 5, actually only 1 really needed to be on there. So it's a little confusing. Does that make, if that makes sense to you? Anyway, discussion with management resulted in a revision to the policy regarding which change orders appear on the agenda, and revision was communicated to staff. So that's pretty much it with the change orders. So the one recommendation we had, and that's on page 12 there, that engineering division project manager's manual needed to be reviewed and updated and completed. It was reviewed and updated in 2008, but there were several sections there that we noted that said to be completed at a later date, and so we just pointed that out. And then management's response is there. So we like to thank Public Works for their patience and their cooperation during the audit. And I'm sure you have questions for me or Chad or his team.
Thank you very much. Do we have questions? Mr. Kiley?
I was glad to see that there was, you did check with the businesses along some of the projects to see if the communications
Yeah, and that was at the, Mark Cotter had specifically asked us to do that, so we did that. So.
And that was not necessarily between the contractor and the business owner, but between the city and the business owner. Correct?
Yeah.
Now, it did say, however, property owners reported communication be less satisfactory when problems with their property developed as a result of construction activity. Was that due to they just didn't like the way it was resolved, or was there something else?
Yeah, there was something else there. Yeah.
Okay.
There was some.
So I believe the paper says that they were all resolved.
Yes.
Yeah.
In a good manner.
Yeah.
But I was just wondering why they felt to begin with that they did have an issue.
I think part of the problem is there's so many people involved. You have your consulting engineer, you have your project manager, I mean, you have your contractor. I mean, you basically have those 3 people. And so maybe sometimes it's, well, who should deal with this? And I don't know. I'm just speculating there. So I didn't put that in the report, but that's what I'm, Chad, I don't know if you want to talk about it, but once we brought it to the attention of management, then I believe it was resolved with the property owner. Just something to work on, I guess, for the future. That everybody said, yeah, communication is very good at the beginning, and during the, they're kept advised of what's going on, what the schedule is, and if they have questions, they're answered. I think it was just maybe when something came up that they felt like there wasn't maybe one person they could go to, and maybe the communication kind of wasn't as good. So,
if I may, Chad Hebe with engineering. And I don't even remember what these issues were. I'll just say that communication is 2 ways. And for it to be effective, it has to be 2 ways. And so it's not just us to them, it's also them to us. And I'll leave it at that.
And I was just wondering if it was communication was there, it's just that the recipient didn't like what was being communicated. I mean, and they can have.
Yeah, sometimes it's that too. They don't like the answer.
Correct.
But when I reached out to the property owners, the 2 people that say, "Oh yeah, we want to talk to you in face to face," so I said, "Okay." Well,
yeah. Okay. And then one other, the recommendation and the follow up here. The manual should be reviewed, updated, and the response was that at 75%, it'll be completed and reviewed and updated as necessary by November 1. Do we have plans on following up to ensure that is? Okay,
yeah.
Great. Thank you.
Yeah.
No other questions? Yes, Mr. Karski, I'm sorry.
I don't know who can talk about this, but Rich, you talked about how other entities have a pre-established standard criteria and kind of retain a record. They have a checklist of how
Yeah,
how
it
the
looks-
project was done, and
There's examples on the internet of checklists, and sometimes they're pretty elaborate. Some cities have like a 4-page form, and it's very elaborate. You know, did they meet the deadline? And then you know the person's supposed to check this and check that, or
and we don't do anything.
we don't do that. We do document substandard performance, because then if the person would bid on a project in the future, we'd have some grounds for denying them.
And that's where my question is.
Yeah.
If we don't have a set of standards, where do we say it's substandard? If you follow where I'm going with that, how do we tell somebody you're substandard if we don't have a set of standards
Well,
that we can hold it to?
Yeah, I don't want to speak for the engineers, but yeah, they can answer that better.
And you'll be hearing a lot more about this in the next couple of months, but we do have it's called our general constructions for our infrastructure improvements. And it's a 50, 60, 70-page document that sets the standard and dictates the expectations from everything from the project, the bidding, the work, the materials, the quality, the communication, the schedule, and it's noted in here. We just spent probably 18 months doing an extremely thorough review of those general conditions. We had an outside legal firm that specializes in contracts, construction contracts, review and compare our standards to the DOT specs and other recognized standards in the industry. So we took their recommendations, and then we sat down with the contractors for, and we've been working on it 18 months, and we probably have made 200 to 300 revisions to this document. Now, some are minor spellings and things like that, but others have really, in my mind, have given us more teeth in them. And so my response would be that our general conditions is where those standards are set and expectations set. And then as we're going through the process in the construction, if some things are not being met, whether it's schedule or quality, with Diane Best now on our team, we document it very extensively for when we get to that point where we have somebody that's has not performed as they should, and they're the low bidder. We can go back to that documentation, and we're not going to award to you, and this is why. And as Rich mentioned, he looked at the one example, and so I think we do a very good job of documenting when we see substandard work, and at this point, I don't feel that this formal evaluation is required.
Okay, you said we're going to be hearing more about that in the next few months. Can you elaborate on that? Are you going to be bringing something to
Yes,
council,
we will be
or?
bringing them to you. We're going to take it to, actually, we'll give a general overview at IRAB next Wednesday, and then we're going to come to the Land Use Committee in June,
Okay.
and then I think it's approved by resolution by the council, so that'll probably happen in July.
Okay, thank you. Super. Good answer. Good. One other, if I may. On the one item that did not make it to the council on the consent contract, I don't know if there's any culpability, but where did it fall down? How does finance pay a bill that should have been on the consent agenda? How does that happen? Don't we have a check and balance somewhere?
Well, I think what management did too, I think they added a line on the routing form just saying, okay, what meeting agenda date is this contract going to be on? And I think they added that to just as a memory jogger. I think somebody in engineering has to tell finance, or they probably just tell the city clerk or whatever. They're the ones that make sure it gets on the council agenda. Somebody in engineering or public works. Finance is going to pay a contract if it's a legitimate contract, and there's a pay request that's had all the signatures. They'll pay that. So I think that was the change made. It's like, okay, what if we just add a line here on the routing form when contracts are being routed? You know, they have to go through legal, they have to go finance all the various signatures before the mayor executes it. Okay, put a line on there. Okay, this was going to be on the consent agenda of the May 3rd, 2016 meeting. And now, could it still slip through the cracks? I suppose something we can look for as auditors. You know, we can certainly do some looking at that. But
is what you're telling me, if somebody puts it on there saying it was done, it's just assumed to have been done and finance pays it?
Yeah. And before that, there wasn't, I think on the routing form, there wasn't any particular place on there. I mean, they assume it got on the consent agenda. Somebody's, make sure that happened. As you recall, back in years ago, that contracts were not on the consent agenda. That's fairly new. I think within the last 5 years that policy's changed. And it's just the ones that meet the state bid limits or above. Not every single agreement or contract's on there, but. So.
It was determined, though, that the one that wasn't there was a kind of an honest mistake. It was just
Yeah. I think it was. I don't think it was deliberate. Like, it wasn't a case. Okay, well, we don't want the council to see this, so we're just trying to slip it through. I didn't see. It was just a routine street construction, and when they looked at it, I said, okay, well, I think the person probably that usually does it, I think they're on vacation. Maybe somebody else is supposed to do it, or maybe it just things happen. Human error.
A list is prepared. A list is worked on during the week between engineering and finance. And so we develop the list for engineering stuff. We send it up to finance. Finance then takes all of the purchasing pieces, all the different contracts that they do, and they're assembled on this list, and then they're emailed over here. I don't know if it's on Fridays, the contracts and the change orders. Now, the contract was, it was logged into the system. It could easily on that email list, it could have been, somebody could have deleted it by mistake. And
yeah. Well, we don't know for sure why it wasn't on the agenda. It could have just been it never got on the list, or was on the list and got deleted.
Okay.
But
thank you. Any other questions? I would yep, Councilor Rippenbeck.
Rich, can you talk about the change orders, then the difference in the change orders and how they'll appear on or won't appear on the agenda based on your findings?
Yeah.
Do you think there will be more, less?
There should be less, because according to my interpretation, I think I talked to the city attorney, just if it's more than the state bid limit, and then that's what really needs to be on the consent agenda. And the other thing, I didn't put this in the report, but there was actually a time, I think in 2014 or 2015, where a council member took it off the consent agenda for discussion, and then there was a vote on it. And we talked to the city attorney. You can't vote on a change order. You can vote on a contract. You can pull it off the consent and go yay or nay. But the change order is simply being communicated to the council, and you can't pull it off the agenda to vote on it. And then he said, I'll make a note of that for procedures, that we won't, if that happens again, we say, you can discuss it, but you can't vote on a change order. It's already been approved by the mayor or the city attorney, whatever.
So maybe from a staff aspect for city council, we need to have a conversation about how does that appear on the agenda, because we look at everything on the consent agenda and we can pull it off and discuss it, but we need to be maybe more clear about what we can actually vote on and what we can't.
Yeah, I think that's what happened. It was actually a very small change order. I think it was like a $5,000 change order.
Remember that one?
Yeah.
Super. Okay.
Motion to accept or file
And
or
a
whatever we
second?
do.
Second. All in favor, aye?
Aye.
Opposed, no. Motion carries. Thank you for a rather complete and, long
Long one. Yeah.
report, but an important one. Next, we have follow-up on audit recommendations.
And Councilmember Kiley, to answer your question, yeah, we have to follow up on these audit recommendations. So, and we do this annual report required by, I think by our audit charter requires it, and then I think our professional auditing standards, we have to do that. So, So this is our report. We're focused on the 2014 audit reports mainly, and then we also included some ones from previous year that were still open. So there's just four of them I want to bring your attention to. On page 3, under CVB, Convention Visitor Bureau Business Improvement District, we had 4 recommendations there. There were 4 bullet points there. That last one, the CVB and the city should establish an agreement which requires the CVB to report certain performance-based measures annually. Measures should be quantitative in nature and specific to the CVB's productivity. And I remember Kim did this audit, and that was back in early 2014, I believe. So we made that recommendation, and it wasn't implemented. But the mayor appointed a CVB funding review committee, I believe, in late 2015, and their final report was in January of this year. They made a very similar recommendation, pretty much the same recommendations. And so when I checked on implemented, not implemented, in progress, a council staff member has been tasked with working with the CVB and city management to develop a dashboard of objective, basically return on investment measures. And that person is in the audience, I believe. So hopefully by the end of this year we'll have something there. So. And then the next one, right below that one, under the family daycare registration, we had recommended there should be a policy to perform random, unannounced inspections on all daycare providers, but management said they concurred. However, they would probably need more FTEs to be able to do that. They're pretty tapped out on their responsibilities. And we'd probably agree with that. So if this council or future councils ever wanted that to happen, they possibly might need another FTE to make that happen. On page 4, at the bottom there, under 2012 audit report, it's from our fraud risk assessment back in 2012. We had 2 outstanding recommendations. One was for ethics training. We had recommended, citywide ethics training. I've been with the city for 33 years, and we've only had one time in those 33 years that we've had mandatory ethics training for all city employees, and that was in late 2007. And so back when we did that fraud risk assessment, we said, we really should do this every maybe 3 to 5 years at least. A lot of corporations make their employees do it every year. A lot of times it's computer-based. If you work for a bank, there's something every year you have to get online and you acknowledge that you understand the ethics policy. So I just talked to the city attorney had that planned, and then one of his deputies that was going to do the training, then she resigned. And so that kind of fell through the cracks. So then I met with Dave Fifley recently, and he said he'll be overseeing the creation of a video for use during the new city employee orientation, explaining the city's ethics requirements. And he's also been tasked with preparing some ethics training materials for presentation to current employees. I think the Board of Ethics had some they've had some conversations. There may be some training from the city attorney's office. And the city newly elected officials are always briefed by the city attorney when you take office. They get their own briefing on that. But we're talking about city employees in general. So we'll continue to follow up with the city attorney, make sure that doesn't get stalled, and that we do that. The other thing was that we'd recommended is update the list of where all the revenue enters the city, the type of revenue, exactly where it comes in, what form it is, how often. That is part of our citywide cash audit, which is in progress right now, just identifying every place in the city where we receive checks or credit cards or currency, and then how much, and that sort of thing. So that'll be, hopefully when that audit report is done, and by the end of this year, we'll have that list. So just
Questions for Rich? Say that again?
Do we need an approval on this?
I have one comment before we do that, and that is that I know in a previous employer of mine, there was a as you said, an online
An
kind
on
of
thing, yeah.
Yeah, and have we looked into buying one of those to use for
You know,
ethics training?
we could do that. There's the one problem for city employees, a lot of them don't have an office or a computer. Public works employees are, it's not impossible. That'd be ideal where you could just do it on computer and then you'd have to log in and maybe watch a video, answer some questions. Maybe that would work. A lot of employees, though, you know, say they're equipment operator, you know, they don't have an office, they don't have a computer assigned to them. You could still figure out a way to do that. I think what we did back in, I think in December 2007, when we had that mandatory citywide training, we all went down to the Orpheum. They had about 3 different sessions scheduled, and you'd go down to the Orpheum, and it took about an hour, and they'd keep track of, you'd have to sign in, and city council members were invited or expected to be there. I think everybody was expected to be there, and that's how they would do the training, and just kind of live and in person. And so, you know, I'll leave it to the city attorney to see what they come up with. You know, so, but I will keep on that one. I think that's a good idea. You know, conflict of interest. You know, can you accept gifts from people? Can you, you know, if I have a side business, can I be a contractor for the city? What about my wife? All those questions that come up, you know, in ethics training. So
I'm sure there's one out there someplace.
Yeah.
That would be applicable to the city, so.
yeah.
Okay, I will accept a motion to approve. So move. Second?
Second.
Second from Erpenbach. All in favor, aye?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you very much, Rich and staff. Open discussion. You got one more thing there?
I got a couple of things, but I don't have to go first.
Okay. Anybody at open discussion? Go ahead.
Arnie Martin's term expires next month, so he has agreed to serve another term. So I put that on, I asked the city clerks to put that on the agenda for the May 3rd city council meeting to reappoint Arnie for another term, and we're very thankful for your service.
Yes, thank you.
Yes. Next meeting, I hope to do at the end of June. I'll send something out next month using that doodle.com, you know, that kind of, I'll put a couple of dates on there. I'm hoping for maybe June 30th or 23rd, something like that, but we'll get that scheduled. Originally, we were going to have Ide Bailey here to present the results of the annual external audit, but there's a little hiccups with getting that financial report done. They're waiting for a couple of audit reports from entities that show up on our balance sheet. You know, I think Metro and the Sioux Falls Housing Commission. But it wasn't ready, so they'd asked that that be postponed to the next meeting. So hopefully the next meeting in June, we'll have representatives from Ide Bailey to go over the results of the financial statement audit. And that's all I got.
I would like to say that Dean Bucknerberg, who is the person who heads up the audit for Ide Bailey, he doesn't do it personally, but he's the manager in charge in the office here, who's been doing this for probably 8 years.
At least.
And he is retiring as of the end of this month, so he will not be able to make the presentation. I told him he was very welcome to come back and sit in and be part of it, so we could recognize him. But in case he isn't here, I would like to publicly say thank you to Dean for all the work that he's done with the city, and it's been very helpful and appreciated. Any other open discussion? There's no executive session that I'm aware of, and so we will. I will ask for a motion to adjourn.
Move to adjourn.
Second. All in favor, aye.
Aye.
Motion carries. Meeting is adjourned. Thanks, everyone.